During my time as a Notion consultant and template creator, I've noticed that almost every Notion user will use a task management system inside of Notion at some point. It's one of the biggest questions that I get on how to manage tasks better, and it doesn't matter how big or small of a team it is, tasks are a central part of productivity and keeping track of things. In this video, I wanted to cover 10 tips and tricks on managing your tasks, whether you're working as a big team or for your personal tasks. If you find this video useful, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. To get started, I'm going to create a basic task database setup so that if you are completely new to Notion, you can also follow along with this 10 tips and tricks. All I'm going to do is just add a new page to my private section by clicking add a page, or you can also go here to add a new page. And I'm just going to go to database and choose empty database to start and basically have a task manager. In order to have a task manager, I'm going to add a property, which is a status, so that I can keep track of the status of the task. And then I'm also going to add a date property over here so that we can track our due date. I'm going to rename this to due date. And then what I'm going to do is now create another view, duplicate view. And this one I'm going to say is a board view. And I'm going to choose board view for that, so then I can see my tasks in a board system. And then finally, I'll also duplicate this view again and then create a calendar view where I'll just change it to calendar. And of course, you can add various other views for your task manager as well. But I think these are the three main ones that I would in general recommend to have, is a table view, a board view, and a calendar of your tasks. So now let's dive into the different tips and tricks that I have. The first tip that I have for you all is to utilize the groupings and also subgroupings. Especially in some of the views like table and board view, these are super useful. What often happens is that you might end up having a lot of different kinds of statuses in one page. And to clean that up, all you have to do is go to the settings over here and turn on group and group by status. And just by doing that, you'll be able to see exactly how many you have in not started, in progress, and done, all in one view, which I really like. You can even aggregate it to see a count of everything. And so instead of, for example, using the filtering over here and filtering by status and creating multiple views that might clog up the tab view on the top, you can end up just having a toggle like this to display your groupings. Another option is that in board view, it's already grouped in one way using this kind of board-based approach, but you can actually also do a subgrouping. So to turn on the subgrouping, you can go to the settings icon here, go to subgroup, and then, for example, you could subgroup it by due date. So if I were to add a due date here for something like this, you can see that here I have no due date and here I have tomorrow. And same thing you could do even with something like a multi-select. So let's say it's a tag. And if you have a finance tag here, then what you can also do is then use the subgroup to then group it by the tag. So you can see all the finance tasks here, and you can create more tags this way and group it. So I would suggest in general that you can make sure to group your tasks, and you can also group it by two different properties, in this case, the status and the tag. And this is going to also help you pinpoint which task you might want to do first, which I think is really helpful for task management. The next tip and trick I have, this one is more for maybe personal use case, is that oftentimes I've seen that it's really hard to keep up with due dates. In that case, I really recommend maybe instead of having a due date to add something called a today checkbox. So all you need is a checkbox property, and then you can say due today. And what you can do with this is that you just look at what kind of tasks that you haven't started yet, and you can just decide what you're going to accomplish today. Think about which ones you want to do, and then you can create a new view, which could be today's tasks. And then all you need to do is filter this and add this as checked. And then this is going to help you reduce overwhelm. So basically, you can take a look at your view all of all of the tasks that you need to do, mark them as to do. So let's say I'm here in today's task, you see nothing here, but then I can just go ahead and check off the ones that I know that I want to prioritize and then get back to here to see a more focused view. So I found that this really helps people to manage their tasks, and it can really help with that. You can even showcase this checkbox through the settings in a board view, for example. If you want to show the property and turn on due today, you can decide which ones you want to do today, and then you can see them all displayed in here. This next tip is great if you work as a team. And in order to showcase this one, I'm going to add a person property and I'll name it assigned. And what this is going to allow you to do is show you only the tasks that you're assigned to. And if another person logs in, they're only going to see the tasks that they're assigned to. So it creates this view that's different depending on who is logged in and viewing it at that time, which can be great as sort of a dashboard type view. So if I click the filtering here and I click filter and I choose assigned, you can see that there's the option called me. If I choose me, what that means is when I add a new page, it's automatically assigned to me. And if I check in here and I assign a task to me, it's also going to show up in the table view over there. So I assigned it to myself. If I go back to the table view, I see 2 tasks for me now here. So in that case, if someone else logs in and views this task manager, they're going to see a different view with only their assigned tasks. So I would recommend implementing a filtered by me view if you're working as a team and you want everyone to see their own views of their tasks. The next tip I have is My Tasks, and that is a feature that if you open your sidebar, you should be able to see it over here. You should also be able to check by clicking the 3 dots over here to customize the sidebar. If you click Customize Sidebar, you can also make sure that this one is shown, and that's going to allow you to utilize My Tasks. What My Tasks does is basically consolidates all of your different task managers across your entire workspace and only shows the ones that you're assigned to. So if I click here, you can see all kinds of tasks and the different places where I have them located. So I have this one in this task manager, I have this one in this tasks tracker, and so on. So all of these are coming from different task databases. And if I click here, I can also configure this to add more task sources. So I can search for the database and so on, and then have this one centralized view of all of my tasks inside of the entire workspace. And in order for it to show there, you do have to go to the settings over here and make sure that when you go to the more settings, that this one has turn into tasks turned on, and it needs to be a task type database for it to go and show up in the My Tasks view. A task type database always has to have a date, a status, and a person property. So those are the requirements in order to have that. And in this case, we do have all of those. So I can just turn it into a task database. And now I could actually see that in my tasks. And if I go to the settings and configure, I now see those 2 tasks that I've added through the other section. If I click this as done, then if I go back, you'll notice that that task that I had before, finance admin, is now in the done section. So that's another way you can utilize this, and I recommend it if you feel like your workspace has so many different task managers that it's hard for you to keep up. Definitely add it to your My Tasks. The next tip that I have that I typically recommend people to add is a conditional color for overdue tasks, so you can just see it at a glance. So let's say that this due date was actually on May 1st, and right now it's kind of hard to see which one is overdue and which one is still due in the future. If I click the settings here and I go to conditional color, I can create a new color setting and I can base it on the due date. And if the due date is before, and then if I go here today, then what I can do is mark it as red. So now I always see the overdue tasks here like this, and I'll be able to then fix it by either changing the due date or making sure to complete the task. And this also applies to other views as well. So if you want to apply that, you can also apply it to the different views. So for each one, you'll need to set that up. So if the due date is before today, mark as red. And then let's say that this was due here, then it can also show up on your board view as well. So make sure to turn that on if you're interested in having that at a glance color coded system. So you could even do things like have red for overdue, yellow for almost overdue or due today, and then other types of coloring as well. So I would recommend checking that out. The next tip that I have is that you can go to your settings over here and go to the more settings and add something called dependencies. If you add dependencies and I choose shift only when dates overlap and turn it on, it basically allows you to create connections between two tasks and the order they should be done. So for example, with implement specs, it could be blocked by the start project specs, and it could be blocking the next one, which is to review project draft. And you can even create that new task over here. So what it does is now you can see the way that it relates to each other using this. If it confuses you, you can even actually rename it so that it's more like this is the previous task and then this one is going to be the next action. Let's say that we need to start the project specs and then we need to implement the specs. So if I just add some due dates here, so let's say that I start the project specs on the 7th, I'm going to implement the project specs on the 14th. And since I have these next actions and everything mapped out like this, and now if we actually add a view here, which is the timeline view, you're going to be able to see the connection between those next action lists. So starting the project specs is before implementing the specs. And then you could even add another task here and connect those to each other as well so that you can kind of see the progression on how the tasks should be organized. And then you'll see the way that the tasks relate to each other through there. So after starting the project specs, next I'm going to implement the specs. Then I have two other next action, which is review project draft and another task here. Next, let's go over adding subtasks. So this is another question I get a lot on how to add subtasks. The easiest way to add a subtask is through the settings, just like we did with the dependency. And if you go to more settings, there's this subtask that you can turn on, and then you can just turn on subtasks. When you turn that on, what happens is now you see this toggle. So if you want to actually map out the subtasks for each thing, you can click sub item here, and then you could, for example, email 1 is subtask 1, email 2, like this, and then create it this way. In terms of the settings for the subtasks, if you go to subtasks over here, you can do different ways. So you can either flatten the list like this. You could also just disable it or the nested in toggle. There's also the filter option. So you only want to see parents, or you want to see parents and sub items, or sub items only. So that's another way to sort of view your subtasks and tasks. And then there's also advanced settings. So you could also choose whether or not you want to show nesting toggle on the title or not. So that means that if this is off, you see how it moves. And then here you can also assign the subtask to a different type of property as well. The next recommendation I have for task management systems is to have clear templates for each type of tasks. So if a task is especially large, or you need to keep track of your procedures for that type of task, you can always create them by going to the database templates over here and creating a new template. So let's say that you have to create a client call report, and that's a type of task, and you can even set up who it should be assigned to and so on, or even the tags already in advance when you select this one. And then you can do /checkbox to then add the actual step-by-step that you need to do this report. So step 1, summarize. Step 2 could be to take notes, and so on. So you can have this kind of procedure already for each type of task, so you know that you have checked everything. So how that works now is if I click a new task and I open it, now I see client call report, and I see that those two are already filled in. Another thing you can do with these templates is to actually set them to repeat in different cycles. So if you need this client call report task to populate every week, you could set that up through here and have that come up here every week as well. Next, I wanted to go over a bit more about the notifications and reminders for your tasks. And again, this is a question I get quite often, is about how the notifications work and how to set up reminders so that you don't have tasks falling through the cracks. One thing I would recommend is to just make sure that all of your notification settings are set up correctly. So that's going to mean if you go to the task manager side over here, you see notify me over here. Also, if you go to the settings by clicking the top here, and within here, if you go to the notifications tab, you can make sure that everything is turned on if that's what you want, and make sure that all of the notification settings are correct. So that's the first place to check if you feel like you're not getting the right notifications. And then the next thing is if you want to be reminded of a specific date, such as this one, you can always click remind and then choose what you want here. So if it's on the day of the event, you can set it up like this, or you can even get a notification a week before and so on. So I highly recommend this. Another option, if you don't want to do it in the due date, but you want to have custom reminders, is to type the date by typing @. So let's say that I want to remind myself next week. I can do @next Tuesday, and then if I click on it, I can add a reminder through here. So if you need to set up multiple ones, you can also just put it directly in the page itself. And then another thing that I hear a lot is that sometimes you don't want the notification every time you get assigned to a task. If you get assigned 30 different tasks, you don't want all of those notifications. You can have it so that the setup for the assigned person here is not to send notifications all the time. So for example, here you can see notifications. If you want not to be notified, you can click none, and that's going to make sure that you don't get notified every time. But that's really dependent on you and your team's workflow. Some people prefer all of the notifications, and some people find that it's really annoying. So this is where you can find those settings. The next one is adding some kind of waiting on or holding status. So if you click here and edit property, within here, what you could do is create a new status option for something like holding. If a task goes here, you can just remember to check back on it again, and so that it doesn't clutter up your main task list. So how I would recommend utilizing that is, let's say that you're waiting on someone for this one, then we can just set that to holding, and it's going to go to the holding within this grouping system. If you don't want to use the grouping system, you can also just duplicate this view, and let's say that this is just the holding tab. And you could filter only the ones that say holding. So you could just have that holding here. And I'm going to remove the grouping from here as well. So group by none. So we only see holding items. And then from the main task view, you could even remove holding items. So you could do status is not holding. And then now basically you have only these, but if something does go into holding, then it would go into this tab. So that's another tip I have. And then in that case, you might even want to create another date property by duplicating this one. You could even create something like follow update. And so if something is in holding, you can choose a day when you want to follow up about it, and then set the reminder as I described before so that you remember to follow up on it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if any of these tips were useful and if you have your own tips and tricks. If you'd like hands-on help and custom setup for either your team, business, or personal Notion use cases, I'd love to hop on a discovery call with you. Be sure to check the description below. I also have some task management templates that I'll link in the description if you'd like a pre-made solution. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I hope to see you all in the next video.